Good evening, welcome to my channel. I am Angel from Lima, Peru. In October last year, I traveled to Chile and at most souvenir shops, I saw Moai miniatures or pictures like this one. I also remember that in 2011, LATAM Airlines offered direct flights to Easter Island from Lima. I almost went there but wasn't able to in the end. Anyway, I got this book, Rapa Nui, A Wound in the Ocean, written by Spanish journalist and historian Mario Amorós and published in Chile in 2018 by Penguin Random House. In 331 pages and 7 chapters, this book is much more than a description or narration. It is an account that takes a position in favor of the inhabitants of Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, the liberty, the resistance against the slavery regime and human rights violations it was subjective to during the 19th and 20th centuries, not to mention the many abuses committed by Chilean government up to now, according to this book. The first chapter, one of the most isolated territories in the world, the origin and features of this original civilization are described. The traditional theory of deforestation as the key factor to the decadence of Rapa Nui is questioned here. European expeditions and accounts, as well as slave raids in the 1860s perpetrated by Peruvian and Chilean ships. That's on page 58. In 1863, the Peruvian government prohibited this practice, but human traffic persisted for some more years. Second chapter, only 111 inhabitants in 1877 as a result of the slave raids, but also smallpox and tuberculosis epidemics, as well as immigration towards the French Polynesia. French missionaries who tried to make the natives convert to Christianism and destroy their culture, starting the dilemma of the sovereignty of Rapa Nui. France showed a lack of interest, so the door was opened to Chile. In 1886, corvette captain Policarpo Toro wrote a text to the Chilean government urging it to take possession of the island. That's on page 92. He himself and the leaders of Rapa Nui signed the transfer of sovereignty to Chile on September the 9th, 1888. There has been some disagreement since then. Did the locals give the sovereignty also the property? Even until 1902, the flag of Rapa Nui was raised every Sunday. On page 109, it says that after signing, Chile could only claim 635 hectares. However, the government considered that region as res nullius, following a colonialist mentality. Chapter 3. Soon the people were reduced to living in a ghetto, Hangaroa, where many of them died due to starvation as a result of the intentional burning of their crops. Leaders of Rapa Nui who opposed the measures taken by Chile were systematically deported, and even the Ariqui, or king, Simeon Griroroco, was assassinated in Valparaiso in 1897. His body was never found. Each administrator was worse, crueler than the previous one. Alberto Sanchez Manterola, Horacio Cooper, Henry Percival Edmonds, who tortured, raped, and killed many. Chapter 4. The rebellion led by Angata Beritaji in 1914. The government chose José Ignacio Vives Solar as the substitute of Edmonds. In the words of author Rolf Forster, both the Chilean government and the company who represented it turned from authoritarianism and plunder to paternalism and charity. Bishop Raphael Edwards denounced the pitiful conditions under which the locals lived, considering that it was leprosy their main tragedy. He accused publicly the Easter Island Exploitation Company, which was the concessionaire of the island, of robbing the locals and treating them like slaves. However, nobody could defeat the Chilean government and the company. Chapter 5. Starting in 1975, the islanders started to raise some animals like cattle and pigs and started planting vegetables, maize and fruit, improving their living conditions somehow. It is stated here that the Rapa Nui community was not submissive towards the arbitrariness and injustice they suffered. However, the Chilean authorities explained this through the supposed lack the locals had of any basic norms of civilized life, and also because of the natural tendency to rebelliousness, laziness, and immorality. I have read these stereotypes on the internet by Chileans who criticize the islanders for the same so many decades later. Anyway, this chapter also deals with the leprosy stigma and how some Chilean authorities sent healthy people to the leprosarium, even girls who did not want to have sex with them. In the words of Chilean writer Joaquín Edwards Bello, Rapa Nui was turned into both penitentiary and leper colony. On November the 11th, 1933, the possession of the island in the name of the Chilean government was registered, which meant the definitive usurpation of the ancestral lands, a situation which persists nowadays. Formal education arrived, but it did not prevent local children from discrimination and abuse. It is unbelievable that secondary school did not exist on the island until 1987, according to the book. One of the most surprising parts of this chapter is the fact that in 1937, President Arturo Alessandri attempted to sell the island to the United States, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Nazi Germany. Sixth chapter. The Society of Friends of Easter Island was formed so as to promote the well-being of the inhabitants of Rapa Nui. That way, some children were able to continue their secondary and tertiary studies in Chile. Manuel Banderas, a government official, traveled to Rapa Nui in 1946 and he denounced the terrible living conditions of the locals on the Chilean press. Naturally, the Navy soon defended its work there, refuting what Banderas had stated. The dungeon the Navy had built served to mistreat the islanders physically and psychologically, including sexual violence. The Society of Friends pressured the government to derogate the company from the contract, but the local civil and political rights were not acknowledged. A landing strip was built in 1949. In theory, it was for the benefit of the people, but it turned out to be a monopoly of Land Chile. And the last chapter, the change of authority from the company to the Navy, did not mean the end of abuse, humiliation, and cruelty. El Mercurio, the most prestigious Chilean newspaper, stated on August 7, 1963, that the islanders were nominally Chilean since, among other things, could not elect or be elected and could not possess land. Some young islanders who had studied at university in Chile returned. One of them was Alfonso Rapu, who wrote a letter to President Eduardo Frei Montalva on December 5, 1964, signed by all the islanders who were over 21. It stated the 13 reasons why they were not free. 3 days later, Rapu was elected mayor of the island. He was arrested but rescued by his people. It was not until 1966 that the Rapa Nui were considered Chilean citizens, with Enrique Rogers as the first civil governor of the island. The epilogue tells us that in 2015 the Council of Elders requested the restitution of all the ancestral land to the Rapa Nui people. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights will issue a ruling that the Chilean government has promised to respect. Well, contrary to the too simple view that is very popular on the internet, Peruvians were enslaving poor Rapa Nui islanders, so the Chilean Navy rescued the latter from the former, but the islanders are lazy and only demand money and more money from Chile. This is repeated as if it were a mantra by some overactive YouTube users. Well, this book, published and sold in Chile, shows us that this issue is far from simple and many wrongs have to be righted. Highly recommendable for those who not only want to explore this unique island, people who not only want to take pictures of the moais, the beautiful statues there, but people who also want to know the long way this civilization has come throughout history. That's why I recommend reading this book. Bye bye.